Most people believe the purpose of school is to teach our kids reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's a place where children grow, develop, and prepare for college and career. But American classrooms today are changing. Many are now being used as platforms to discuss controversial political and social issues. Some say the classroom has become a new battleground. Are some teachers truly educating our kids, or are they indoctrinating them? How much influence do they actually have on young, innocent minds? Well, joining us is Natalia Petrzela, historian of contemporary American politics and culture. And she's author of the new book, Classroom Wars: Language, Sex, and the Making of Modern Political Culture. Ms. Petrzela, so how are classrooms today changing? You say they could even lead to wars. What kind of wars are you referring to?
It's interesting that you say that, because when I came up with that title, I initially thought of the notion of classroom war as really in a metaphorical sense, about the kind of reflecting the bitterness of controversies that went on, but not in terms of actual combat. But I think, as recent events have shown, right now, classrooms are becoming battlegrounds in a very literal sense, in terms of battle, in terms of
yeah,
violence.
unfortunately,
tragically,
yes,
I think.
Yes.
But yeah, in the sense of the book that I'm writing about, I'm talking about the bitterness of political and cultural conflict over, in that book, particularly issues about teaching morality, about teaching ideas about patriotism and nationhood, which have been, I think, some of the really central issues in American curriculum in the past, certainly 50 years, if not more. And so I think that, yeah, as you mentioned, parents value education a lot for their kids and have very strong feelings about how they should learn to be citizens and moral agents. And schools are crucial to that.
Well, it seems like in this day and age, when we have mass shootings, they may teach children to go out into the streets and demand gun control, but they don't really understand the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think when you say they, are you talking about teachers?
Yeah, teachers and the way they teach the students.
Well, I think, it's the tradition of American public education has always been so much about localism, and actually in giving a lot of individual power to teachers and districts. And so I think it's hard to make a blanket statement about teachers overall. But look, when children are getting shot up in classrooms today, there's no way that this isn't going to be a topic of conversation. And absolutely, I think some teachers are encouraging students to exercise their political rights, to be activists, and to even do the radical act of leaving classrooms and taking to the streets. So there's certainly that. But, I think there are other more politically conservative teachers who are certainly not encouraging that course of action either. So it's hard to make a blanket statement about this, although the media attention has absolutely, I think, been on youth who are, demanding gun control and taking to the streets to do so.
Well, it seems like there may be more emphasis on activism rather than understanding our Constitution and our processes and separation of powers and so forth. Are we seeing that still being taught or not?
Oh, I think so. And as a historian, I think that's crucially important. I mean, our schools should not be places where our schools should not be political rallies. They should be places where kids are learning about, history and our institutions. And I don't think that it's so new that schools are becoming activist spaces. I mean, in the book that I write about in the 1960s, how kids, in demand of things like bilingual education and more minority hiring, they also took to the streets. They walked out of schools all over California and Texas. That's 50 years ago, actually, next month. So I don't think it's such a new development, although certainly with social media, this is happening on a scale that we have not seen before.
Yeah, I know when I was in high school in the 70s, early 70s, it was anti-Vietnam War. We were protesting and so forth. So I don't think it's changed that much. Maybe social media has changed it. What do you think? What is the culture now?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think it's amplified it in a very big way. And I think that, if you think of the scale, putting children aside for the moment, but think of the scale of something like the Women's March, right after the 2016, right after the inauguration. That people say that that's the biggest protest in U.S. history. And it could never have been such if it were not for Facebook and Twitter. And I think we are absolutely seeing that today in the wake, especially most relevantly right now, of the Parkland shooting, and the way that kids are organizing around that. There's no way, even with the scope of the Vietnam activism you're talking about, or the stuff that I'm talking about in the late 1960s in the book, there's no way that could have happened on the same national scale that we see today, thanks to these technologies.
Now, if we continue down this road, do you think there will be any public institutions in America that are free from politics and social debate?
I don't think so. And I don't think it's possible. And, as a historian, if you look back to the so-called golden age when schools were not political, they actually were political. There just weren't such a diversity of voices involved in these institutions to point that out. I think it's pretty clear that as American schools, which are far from perfect, as they've become more inclusive, those voices have been pointing out, hey, what you think is not political, what you think is neutral, actually is. And I think that while that's made the schools much more contested battlegrounds, to use the word that I think we can both agree on is quite accurate, I think that can seem like it's been a decline or things have gotten worse, but in some ways that's a result of more people coming to the table and pointing out things that have always been political or controversial. They just haven't had a chance to say so.